Welcome back to Boring History, where history is anything but boring. Today, we're diving into the hidden lifeline of civilization, sanitation, from ancient sewers to sacred baths. If you enjoy uncovering the fascinating and sometimes messy side of the past, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. So let's start. Imagine this. You're walking through a busy city street thousands of years ago. No soap, no shiny bathroom tiles, no plumbing, no waste collection trucks rattling down the road at 6 a.m. The air is thick with smells you can't quite place, and honestly, maybe you don't want to. Yet somehow, people not only lived in these places, they thrived. Trade was booming, families were growing, temples were shining, and cities were alive with energy. Sounds wild, right? But here's the thing. Behind all that growth, one invisible hero kept things running smoothly: sanitation. Now, sanitation is one of those words that sounds boring at first. It makes you think of warning labels or those "wash your hands before returning to work" signs in restaurant bathrooms. But don't let the dull word fool you. Sanitation is epic. Without it, there is no civilization. It's not just about staying clean, it's about staying alive, staying organized, and even staying connected as a society. Think about it. What's the first thing a city needs to keep functioning? Roads? Markets? Temples? If waste piles up, if water gets contaminated, the whole place collapses. You can have the most beautiful palace, but if everyone gets sick from bad water, the palace won't matter much. So sanitation wasn't some side project in history, it was the foundation. And the cool part? Different civilizations solved this problem in totally different ways. They didn't just build pipes and drains because they were practical. Nope. For them, managing water and waste was cultural, spiritual, and political. For some, keeping water clean was a religious duty. For others, it was a matter of pride, showing off how advanced and organized they were. Sanitation, in other words, was never just about flushing stuff away. It was about identity. We're going to travel back to three of the big players who had their own unique takes on this. Rome, where aqueducts stretched for miles like giant stone highways in the sky, bringing water into bustling cities. The Indus Valley civilization, where even everyday homes had drains and baths, way ahead of their time. The Maya, who combined practical engineering with ritual practices, weaving spirituality into their approach to water and waste. Each of these societies faced the same messy, unavoidable problem. How do you keep thousands of people living in one place without drowning in their own? Well, you know. And each came up with solutions that were not only smart but also symbolic. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Do I really want to spend time hearing about toilets and sewers? Short answer, yes. Because once you start digging, pun fully intended, the story gets fascinating. Aqueducts weren't just stone arches. They were flexes of engineering and empire. Public baths weren't just places to scrub up. They were social hubs, like the coffee shops of the ancient world. And drains carved into streets weren't just for convenience. They reflected how deeply people thought about order, cleanliness, and even the gods. Let's be real, sanitation isn't glamorous. Nobody builds a statue of a sewer pipe. Well, almost nobody. But what if I told you that behind every thriving city, behind every golden age, there was a quiet network of systems making sure people could drink, wash, and not die from their own waste? That's the story we're about to uncover. Here's where our journey takes us. First, we'll wander through the grandeur of Rome, a place where water wasn't just necessary, it was celebrated. Romans built fountains not only to provide water but also to show off their power. They engineered toilets that seated dozens of people at once. Because yes, apparently, bathroom time was social time. Then, we'll head over to the Indus Valley civilization, one of the world's earliest urban societies. These folks were absolute sanitation masterminds. While other places were still figuring out farming, the Indus people were already designing houses with private bathrooms, drains that connected to street sewers, and systems to keep neighborhoods from turning into swamps. Seriously, they were so advanced that modern archaeologists are still scratching their heads, wondering how they pulled it off 4,000 years ago. Finally, we'll dive into the world of the Maya, who lived deep in the jungles of Central America. For them, water and cleanliness weren't just practical needs, they were spiritual acts. They built reservoirs, created water filtration systems, and treated water like a sacred gift. Ritual cleansing wasn't just about hygiene, it was about connecting with the divine. To understand Mayan sanitation is to understand how they saw the universe itself. By the end of this journey, here's the big insight. Sanitation is not just about pipes, drains, or buckets of water. It's about what it means to a community. For some, it was survival. For others, it was pride. For still others, it was worship. And all of that shaped the cities, the cultures, and the legacies they left behind. So, buckle up, or should I say, wash up? This isn't a dry history lecture. Well, maybe dry is the wrong word when we're talking about water systems. It's a story about how people in the past dealt with the same stuff we deal with today, only without the luxury of flushing toilets, soap dispensers, and plumbing repair hotlines. Sanitation, believe it or not, is one of the unsung heroes of civilization. And once you start looking at history through this lens, you'll never see an ancient bath, a drain, or even a humble clay pipe the same way again. Let's rewind the clock, way before Rome, before the Maya, even before the Indus Valley engineers were sketching drains. We're talking thousands of years back, when humans were just figuring out how to live in one place without constantly wandering off. So, first things first, what do we even mean by sanitation in a historical sense? Today, the word makes us think of modern plumbing, shiny sinks, hand sanitizer, and those blue disinfectant tablets you drop in toilets. But back then, sanitation was basically three things. Water management, figuring out how to get clean water and keep it clean. Waste removal, moving the dirty stuff away from where you live, eat, and sleep. Disease control, though they didn't know about germs yet, they definitely knew that bad smells and dirty water made people sick. That's it. Simple, but world-changing. Now, let's talk early evidence. You might think toilets are a modern luxury, but nope. Archaeologists have dug up proof that humans have been making toilets and drains since the days of mud huts and stone tools. Some of the earliest toilets go back to Mesopotamia, around 3000 BC. Imagine that, thousands of years ago, someone was already sitting on a primitive seat and thinking, well, this is better than squatting behind a bush. Even earlier, in Neolithic settlements, people were carving little drainage channels into the ground. Nothing fancy, just ditches and pits, but it showed they were thinking about where waste should go. It's almost funny to imagine someone in a tiny Stone Age village saying, listen folks, if we're all dumping waste in the same spot, this place is gonna stink. That's basically the first city planning meeting in history. And here's the interesting part. The size of settlements played a huge role. As long as humans lived in small groups, sanitation wasn't a big deal. A few families could just toss waste outside the hut, and nature would take care of it. Rain would wash things away, soil would absorb it, animals would... Well, let's not get into details. But once villages grew into towns, suddenly you had hundreds of people living close together. And with hundreds of people came hundreds of, let's just say, piles of problems. That's when sanitation went from optional to absolutely necessary. Without it, disease would spread, water would get foul, and the village would collapse under its own mess. Basically, sanitation was the secret ingredient that allowed humans to scale up from small groups to full-blown cities. Let's put it this way, no sanitation equals no urban life. Think about it. Why did humans settle in the first place? Because farming allowed them to stop chasing animals across plains. They grew crops, built permanent homes, raised animals, and suddenly communities started to form. But farming came with its own challenge. More people in one place. More people means more waste. And more waste means you can't just wing it anymore. You need systems. And once those systems were in place, something magical happened. Populations grew. Clean water meant fewer deaths. Organized waste disposal meant fewer outbreaks of sickness. That meant kids survived longer, adults stayed healthier, and villages expanded. Sanitation in its early forms literally unlocked urbanization. It was the difference between a camp of families and a town with streets, houses, and markets. Now, let's zoom in on those early toilets for a second, because they're pretty fascinating. In Mesopotamia, archaeologists found what are basically stone or clay toilets built into houses. These weren't flush toilets, of course. Gravity did most of the work. Waste dropped into pits or drains, sometimes lined with clay bricks to keep things contained. Was it glamorous? Absolutely not. Was it effective? Surprisingly. And then there were drainage systems. At sites like Skara Brae in Scotland, a Neolithic settlement around 3000 BCE, people built small stone channels under their houses to carry waste away. Imagine living in a stone hut with a built-in drain. That's some serious innovation for the Stone Age. These early systems show us something important. People weren't just surviving, they were thinking. They looked around, saw the problem, and started problem solving in ways that shaped the future of civilization. Here's another cool link. Water, sanitation, and population growth are tied together like 3 strands of rope. The cleaner the water, the healthier the people. The healthier the people, the more the community grows. And the bigger the community grows, the more sanitation systems you need. It's like a feedback loop that kept pushing humans to innovate further. Without clean water, cities couldn't survive. Think about what happens if water sources get polluted. Crops fail, animals die, and diseases spread. So early people became obsessed with managing water. Not just finding it, but protecting it, channeling it, and keeping it separate from waste. You can almost hear them saying, okay, drinking water on this side, dirty water on that side, do not mix. That's the birth of organized sanitation. And don't underestimate the spiritual angle, even this early. Many ancient cultures linked cleanliness with purity and dirtiness with danger or evil. Even before germ theory, people felt in their bones that clean water was life, dirty water was death. That belief probably pushed them to take sanitation seriously, even when they couldn't explain the science. So, to wrap this chapter up, sanitation didn't suddenly appear when Rome started building aqueducts or when the Indus Valley laid out its grid-like drains. Its roots go way deeper, into the mud and stones of early farming villages. Sanitation was born the moment humans decided, hey, let's live together, grow food, and build homes in one spot. That decision created a brand new challenge. How do we keep this place livable when everyone's eating, drinking, and, well, producing waste in the same space? From stone drains in Scotland to clay toilets in Mesopotamia, those first answers set the stage for everything that came later. In short, sanitation is as old as civilization itself. It wasn't just about staying clean, it was about survival, growth, and the first steps toward building cities. Without those early problem solvers carving drains into stone and digging pits for waste, we might still be wandering the earth in small groups, looking for the next river to camp beside. Let's take a trip back about 4,500 years to one of the coolest but often underrated civilizations in history, the Indus Valley Civilization. We're talking around 2600 to 1900 BCE, in the lands that today stretch across Pakistan and northwest India. While the Egyptians were busy building pyramids and the Mesopotamians were scribbling cuneiform, the folks in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were quietly building cities that looked suspiciously modern. And when I say modern, I don't mean they had coffee shops on every corner or Wi-Fi routers. I mean they had urban planning that would make some of today's city planners blush. The streets weren't random zigzags. They were laid out in a grid. Imagine walking into a city back then and seeing long, straight streets intersecting at right angles, forming neat blocks. No messy alleyways, no, oops, this road just dead ends into someone's cow pen. It was organized, intentional, and designed to keep life running smoothly. But here's the kicker. Their greatest flex wasn't just the grid layout. It was the drainage system. Yep, while other parts of the world were still figuring out huts and ditches, the Indus Valley people were engineering drains that would put some modern towns to shame. Every major street had covered brick-lined drains running alongside it. And when I say covered, I mean they actually placed flat bricks or stone slabs on top, creating something like a sewer network. Wastewater from homes flowed into these drains, which then channeled it out of the city. You know how today we complain about potholes or overflowing gutters during rainy season? Well, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro had figured out how to manage stormwater and wastewater 4,000 years ago. That's next-level city management. Now, let's zoom in on the homes because this part blows my mind. Many houses, not just fancy ones but even regular ones, had their own bathrooms and latrines. Imagine that. While most of the world still thought bathing was a once-in-a-while river dip, these folks had dedicated spaces inside their houses for washing up. They built platforms that probably held jars of water, with drains that carried used water straight into the street drains. Some homes even had brick-lined latrines, basically ancient toilets. Think about how revolutionary that was. Private bathrooms for 1,500 years ago. Meanwhile, some places in the world didn't get indoor toilets until the 19th century. The Indus Valley was millennia ahead. But wait, it gets even better. The drains weren't just random channels that people ignored once built. They designed them with soak pits and manholes. Yeah, you heard right, manholes. These were openings at street level that allowed people to climb in and clean the drains when they got clogged. Which means they didn't just build a system, they planned for maintenance. That's like building a car and also inventing the mechanic's garage at the same time. Soak pits were basically pits filled with sand or gravel that absorbed liquid waste, filtering it before it seeped into the ground. This not only prevented flooding but also helped keep things relatively hygienic. Imagine an ancient city where water didn't pool into stinky cesspits every time it rained. That's the Indus Valley for you. All of this tells us something huge. These cities weren't just collections of houses. They were carefully managed communities with rules, roles, and responsibilities. Think about what it takes to keep such a system running. You need brickmakers producing standardized bricks. You need masons and builders who know how to lay those bricks properly. You need some kind of civic authority deciding where the streets, drains, and houses go. You need workers who regularly lift those manhole covers and clean out blockages. This wasn't some every man for himself setup. It was collective, organized, and honestly, impressive. It screams of a society where civic organization was a priority. And the best part? This wasn't just in one city. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and several other Indus cities all followed similar layouts. Which means sanitation wasn't an accident or the passion project of one clever engineer. It was part of their culture. They valued cleanliness and urban order so much that they built it into the DNA of their civilization. Compare that with, say, medieval Europe, where people literally tossed chamber pot contents out of windows onto the street below. The Indus Valley folks would probably shake their heads and say, "Seriously? You had thousands of years to catch up, and this is what you came up with." And here's something else worth noticing. We still haven't cracked the mystery of their writing system. We can't read their inscriptions yet, but even without written records, their cities speak loud and clear. The bricks, drains, bathrooms, and soak pits are like a silent message from the past. We cared about hygiene. We cared about order. We cared about making city life livable. Think about what that says about their priorities. While kings elsewhere were building giant monuments to show off their power, the Indus Valley people were quietly making sure every household had access to sanitation. That's not just engineering genius, that's social genius. So let's sum this up. Grid-planned cities, clear, organized, and way ahead of their time. Covered brick-lined drains, basically an early sewer network. Household bathrooms and latrines, revolutionary private hygiene. Soak pits and manholes, proof they planned for maintenance and long-term use. Civic organization, an entire society working together to make urban life possible. That's why historians call the Indus Valley civilization an urban sanitation marvel. It wasn't flashy like pyramids or dramatic like ziggurats, but it was practical, smart, and deeply human-centered. And honestly, if I had to choose between living next to a pyramid or living in a city with drains and toilets, I know where I'd pick. The Indus Valley shows us that civilization isn't just about big temples or fancy palaces. Sometimes, it's about the less glamorous stuff. The drains under the street, the bathroom in your home, the soak pit you never see but rely on every day. And that's why sanitation here isn't just an archaeological detail. It's the backbone of why these cities could thrive for centuries. So, next time you hear about Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, don't just picture ruins of brick walls. Picture a living, breathing city where thousands of people woke up, used their bathrooms, washed up in their private bathing spaces, and walked down streets free of sewage puddles, all thanks to one of the most advanced sanitation systems the ancient world ever saw. Okay, so we've talked about the bricks, the drains, the soak pits, and the super-organized streets of the Indus Valley. Clearly, these folks were sanitation overachievers. But here's the real question: why? Why did they care so much about cleanliness? Was it just practical? Or did they also have cultural and social reasons for making their cities some of the cleanest in the ancient world? Let's start with the evidence we actually have: bathing platforms. Archaeologists have found these raised areas inside houses, often made of bricks, where people probably poured water over themselves. The water then drained away through a channel into the street drains. Think of it as the ancient version of your bathroom floor with a neat little slope toward the drain hole. Now, here's the thing: not everyone in the ancient world thought regular bathing was necessary. In fact, in many later societies, baths were a luxury or even suspicious. There were times in medieval Europe when too much bathing was thought to invite sickness. But the Indus Valley people? They seem to have loved staying clean. The presence of bathing areas in so many homes suggests hygiene wasn't just for the rich, it was for everyone. That already tells us something about their attitude. Cleanliness wasn't optional. It was part of daily life. You can almost imagine some Indus Valley mom saying, "You're not going to the market until you wash up, young man." But there's probably more to it than just practical hygiene. Many historians and archaeologists speculate that water had ritual significance for these people. Remember, this is a culture that likely fed into early Proto-Hindu traditions. In Hinduism, water is sacred. Rivers like the Ganges are not just water sources, they're holy. Bathing in water is often tied to spiritual purity, washing away not just dirt but also sin or bad luck. Now, we can't say for certain that the Indus Valley people thought exactly this way. Their writing system hasn't been fully decoded, so they didn't leave behind a bathroom manual. But the sheer amount of attention they gave to bathing areas suggests it wasn't just about sweat and grime. It was probably spiritual, symbolic, and maybe even social. Bathing might have been as much about preparing yourself to connect with the divine as it was about feeling fresh. And then there's the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro, one of the most famous structures of the entire civilization. This massive, brick-lined pool was carefully waterproofed and had steps leading down into it. It wasn't some random swimming hole. It looks designed for ritual bathing. Imagine the scene: groups of people gathering at the Great Bath, stepping down into the cool water, cleansing themselves together, not just to feel clean, but to feel pure. It's hard not to see the cultural and spiritual side of sanitation here. Now let's shift gears to something equally fascinating: shared responsibility for cleanliness. The Indus Valley didn't build drains and bathrooms just for individual houses, they built them for entire cities. That means sanitation was a community project. Think about what it takes to maintain covered drains and manholes in every street. It's not like one person could say, "Oh, I'll just clean my section and leave the rest." No, this required cooperation. The whole community had to pitch in, or at least follow a system where workers maintain the drains for everyone's benefit. That's sanitation as social glue. In fact, the very urban planning of these cities feels like a mirror of their social order. Straight streets, standardized bricks, uniform layouts. It's as if the society was saying, we all follow the same rules, and those rules keep us clean and safe. Compare that to places where cities grew chaotically with winding lanes and no thought for waste. The Indus Valley looks disciplined, almost egalitarian. This emphasis on order and cleanliness probably went hand in hand with social expectations. Maybe they saw keeping the city clean as part of being a good citizen. It wasn't just about your home, it was about your neighborhood and your city. The drains outside your door weren't just your problem, they were everyone's responsibility. That kind of shared civic mindset is rare in history, and it might explain why their sanitation systems worked so smoothly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. This focus on sanitation likely had a huge impact on public health and longevity. Of course, we can't dig up exact medical records from 2000 BCE, But logic tells us that cleaner cities meant fewer diseases. When waste is properly managed, when water is less contaminated, people get sick less often. It's that simple. Think about it. Even today, one of the biggest health risks in many parts of the world is unsafe water and poor sanitation. It causes disease outbreaks, child mortality, and shortened lifespans. Now imagine a civilization 4,500 years ago that already figured out how to reduce those risks. That's huge. It probably allowed them to maintain larger populations, healthier communities, and more stable cities. Some scholars even argue that sanitation might have been one of the key reasons the Indus Valley lasted as long as it did. While other early settlements may have collapsed under the weight of disease or filth, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro flourished for centuries. Their people understood, maybe not scientifically, but practically, that clean water and clean streets meant survival. And let's be honest, living in a city where the streets don't smell like sewage and where you can bathe daily probably just made life a whole lot nicer. Sometimes the simplest comforts are the most powerful. Sanitation in the Indus Valley wasn't just about drains and bricks. It was a worldview. It reflected how they saw themselves, their community, and maybe even their gods. Cleanliness wasn't just practical, it was sacred, social, and life-sustaining. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. For the Indus Valley people, sanitation wasn't just hidden infrastructure underground. It was woven into their culture, their rituals, and their daily lives. They weren't just living in cities, they were living in clean, organized, cooperative communities that valued both body and spirit. So far, the Indus Valley has looked like a sanitation paradise. Grid-planned streets, covered drains, soak pits, private bathrooms. These folks nailed urban hygiene thousands of years before most of the world even thought about it. But here's the twist in the story. For all their brilliance, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro eventually fell into decline. What happened? Did people suddenly decide they hated drains? Did the bath builders go on strike? Not quite. The truth is, even the best sanitation system can't save you when Mother Nature decides to shake things up. Let's dive into some of the main theories about their collapse. One big idea is that repeated flooding slowly wrecked the Indus cities. Remember, these towns were built near rivers, the Indus and its tributaries. Great for farming, but risky when the rivers flooded. A little flood is fine, the drains can handle it. But imagine massive floods again and again, dumping silt, clogging drains, and washing away houses. Even the best brick-line system can't survive if it's buried under mud every year. Archaeologists have actually found layers of silt in some Indus sites, which backs up this idea. It's like the city kept drowning, getting up, then drowning again until people just gave up. Another theory is that the rivers themselves betrayed the cities. Over time, rivers can shift course, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. If your whole civilization is built around a river, and one day the river just decides to flow somewhere else, you're in big trouble. Your farms dry up, your water supply vanishes, and your carefully built drainage network is left high and dry, literally. Some scholars think this is exactly what happened to parts of the Indus Valley. The mighty Sarasvati River, often mentioned in later Indian traditions, may have dried up or shifted away. That would explain why once thriving cities suddenly looked like ghost towns. Yep, even 4,000 years ago, climate change was a thing. Evidence suggests the Indus Valley went through a period of drought as monsoon rains weakened. Less rain means less water for farming, less drinking water, and weaker rivers. And when water disappears, sanitation systems collapse with it. A drain is useless if there's no water to flush things out. Think about it. These cities were designed with a certain environment in mind. Regular rains, flowing rivers, fertile fields. Once that balance shifted, the whole system started to wobble. You can't bathe in your platform or flush your latrine if the wells are running dry. Some historians think there wasn't one dramatic, boom, it's over event. Instead, the decline was slow. Floods here, droughts there, rivers shifting bit by bit. Over time, cities became harder to maintain, farming became tougher, trade slowed down. People may have started moving away, leaving behind those neat drains and manholes for archaeologists to find centuries later. It's like when your favorite cafe stops maintaining the Wi-Fi, the AC breaks, and the menu shrinks. You don't quit going all at once, but eventually, you find somewhere else. Same idea. The Indus Valley cities just became less livable. Here's where it gets real. The Indus Valley civilization had one of the most advanced sanitation systems in history. But all those drains, soak pits, and manholes couldn't protect them from flooding, shifting rivers, or climate change. It's a humbling reminder. You can be as organized, clean, and civic-minded as possible, but if the environment changes drastically, you're vulnerable. Sanitation is powerful, but it's not invincible. And honestly, that lesson feels very relevant today. We have plumbing, water treatment plants, recycling systems, but we're also dealing with rising seas, stronger storms, and shifting climates. Sound familiar? The Indus Valley story is basically saying, hey, don't get too cocky. Take care of the environment, or all your drains won't save you. The decline of the Indus Valley wasn't just a tragedy, it's also a teacher. It shows us civilization isn't just about building systems, it's about adapting them to the environment. Even advanced technology has limits if the natural world turns against it. Social order and civic organization are fragile if water, the most basic resource, runs out or goes wild. Think about how tightly their society was tied to sanitation. Clean water, clean streets, shared responsibility, it was their lifeline. Once the environment broke that chain, the system unraveled. Even though the cities declined, the legacy of the Indus Valley is still with us. Their obsession with cleanliness probably influenced later cultures in South Asia. Ideas about ritual bathing, the sacredness of water, and the connection between purity and community might trace their roots back here. And the ruins still whisper their lesson. Sanitation can take you far, but respect for the environment takes you further. The Indus Valley civilization is often called an urban sanitation marvel, and it was. But its decline reminds us that no matter how brilliant your engineering is, you're always at the mercy of the earth and sky. Floods can bury drains. Rivers can walk away. Rains can stop falling. So, the story ends not with clogged toilets or broken bricks, but with a warning. Technology alone isn't enough. To keep civilizations alive, we also have to live in sync with nature. It's both sad and inspiring. Sad because one of the most advanced civilizations of its time faded away. Inspiring because they left us a blueprint of what's possible when a society values cleanliness, order, and community. When people think of Rome, they imagine gladiators, emperors, or Julius Caesar looking dramatic with a laurel crown. But honestly, one of the greatest things the Romans ever did wasn't winning battles or building colosseums. It was figuring out how to move water around. Yep, aqueducts, sewers, baths, and fountains. Forget swords and sandals. The real Roman flex was plumbing. Rome wasn't just a city. At its height, it was a mega metropolis of over 1 million people. Imagine that many folks crammed together without running water. Disaster, right? The Romans knew this, so they leaned into their infrastructure genius. Let's walk through how they turned sanitation into both a science and a way of life. First stop, aqueducts. These were massive stone channels that carried clean water from faraway springs and rivers straight into the city. Some aqueducts stretched for dozens of kilometers, and they worked only with gravity. No pumps, no motors, just clever design and careful slopes. The Romans were like, who needs machines when you've got math and arches? At its peak, Rome had 11 aqueducts, bringing in around 200 million gallons of water every day. That's insane even by modern standards. This water fed into fountains, baths, private houses, if you were rich, and even into businesses like bakeries and tanneries. The scale is what blows your mind. Imagine living in 50 BC, watching a stone bridge carry water across valleys and hills, all so you could fill up your jug. It was like having a mountain spring on tap. But Romans didn't just want water for survival, they turned it into a social event. Enter the public fountains and baths. The city was dotted with fountains where anyone could collect fresh water. And the baths? Oh man, they weren't just about scrubbing off the dirt. Roman baths were the ultimate hangout spots. Picture it, giant complexes with hot pools, cold pools, steam rooms, and even gyms. For a small fee, you could spend the whole day chilling there. Think of it like a spa mixed with a modern coffee shop. People came to gossip, do business, and relax. Senators, soldiers, merchants, everyone went. Hygiene was important, but so was the social vibe. And thanks to the aqueducts, the baths had a never-ending water supply. One Roman writer joked that if you wanted to hear all the city's rumors, just hang out in the baths for an hour. Basically, they were the ancient Roman version of Twitter. Loud, crowded, and always buzzing with hot takes. Now let's talk about the star of Roman sanitation, the Cloaca Maxima. The name literally means greatest sewer, and it lived up to the hype. Originally built around the 6th century BCE, it was designed to drain swampy land around Rome. But as the city grew, it evolved into a full-blown sewer system. The Cloaca Maxima carried waste and rainwater out of the city and into the Tiber River. It was massive enough that people could walk inside it, not that you'd want to. Imagine a giant underground tunnel made of stone, silently keeping the city livable. Without it, Rome would have been a stinky swamp. Here's the crazy part. Parts of the Cloaca Maxima are still around today. That's Roman engineering for you. Their sewers outlived entire empires. Of course, not everything went straight into a fancy sewer. Daily waste management was still a challenge. Most Romans used chamber pots, little portable toilets they kept at home. And yes, sometimes people dumped the contents out the window. If you were unlucky enough to walk by at the wrong time, you might get a surprise shower. But the city tried to stay on top of things. Rome employed street sweepers to collect garbage and keep the roads clear. Cesspits were also common, especially in areas not directly connected to the main sewer. These were basically underground tanks where waste collected until someone came along to empty them. Not the most glamorous job, but absolutely necessary. Public latrines were another Roman invention. These were long benches with holes, lined up side by side. No privacy, just you and 20 strangers doing your business while chatting about the weather. Underneath, running water carried everything away. Romans turned even toilet time into a social activity. Efficiency or awkwardness? You decide. Rome wasn't the first civilization to care about sanitation. We already saw the Indus Valley folks nailing it. But Rome scaled it up like no one else. They understood that a city of 1 million people couldn't survive without serious water management. Their aqueducts kept the baths flowing, their fountains supplied drinking water, and the Cloaca Maxima stopped the streets from turning into open sewers. This mix of technology and social life is what made their system so unique. Hygiene wasn't just about avoiding disease, it was tied to culture, leisure, and status. Clean water wasn't just practical, it was part of what it meant to be Roman. For all their genius, the Romans weren't exactly shy about mixing hygiene with awkwardness. Still, it worked and their cities thrived because of it. So, when you think of Rome's greatness, don't just picture the Colosseum or Caesar's speeches. Remember the aqueducts stretching across the hills, the baths echoing with gossip, and the Cloaca Maxima rumbling beneath the streets. These systems made it possible for 1 million people to live together without the place turning into a disaster zone. Rome's real empire wasn't just about land or armies. It was about water. They mastered it, moved it, and used it to shape daily life. In their world, clean water was power. And here's the kicker, parts of their system still exist. 2,000 years later, the aqueducts and sewers remind us that Rome wasn't just building for today. They were building for forever. If you ever time traveled to ancient Rome, you wouldn't need to ask, where's the action? The answer was simple, the baths. Not just a quick rinse and go spot, but giant complexes called thermae, buzzing with people every day. For Romans, cleanliness wasn't a boring chore. It was a lifestyle, almost a performance. And honestly, they made it look fun. The thermae weren't just about hygiene. These places were the heart of Roman social life. Picture buildings so huge they made shopping malls look small. We're talking massive domes, marble floors, statues, gardens, even libraries attached to them. You'd go in for a wash and end up staying half the day. Everybody went, rich, poor, old, young. Admission was cheap, sometimes even free when emperors wanted to score points with the public. Politicians strolled through, hoping to look approachable. Merchants cut deals while soaking in hot water. Friends gossiped in the steam rooms. If you skipped the baths too often, people probably wondered if you were sick or antisocial. So in a way, the baths were like Starbucks mixed with a gym and a wellness retreat. A place to get clean, relax, and catch up on news. But with way fewer pumpkin spice lattes and way more sweaty senators. The bathing routine itself was a whole process. It wasn't just jump in, splash around, leave. Oh no, Romans had steps. Tepidarium, warm room. You started here to ease in. Think of it as the warm-up stretch of bath time. Caldarium, hot room. This was the sweat zone. Super hot water, steam, and sometimes heated floors. Basically a giant sauna. You'd sweat out the dirt and toxins while chatting with your buddies. Frigidarium, cold room. Finally, you plunged into freezing water. Shocking? Absolutely. Refreshing? Definitely. Romans swore it boosted circulation and toughened the body. Some baths also had gyms, massage rooms, and gardens for chilling afterward. So yeah, bath time was less scrub and go and more all-day event. And while this might sound like luxury, it was also practical. Sweating and plunging probably did help with hygiene. Even without soap, the combo of heat, scrubbing, and rinsing kept people cleaner than you'd expect for 2,000 years ago. Here's the fun part, Romans didn't really use soap. At least, not the bubbly bar stuff we think of today. Instead, they had a different system. First, they'd rub oil all over their bodies. Olive oil was a favorite. Then, they'd take a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper, and scrape off the oil along with dirt, sweat, and dead skin. Sounds weird, but it worked. Imagine peeling an orange, except the orange is you. It wasn't glamorous, but it left the skin smooth and shiny. Plus, oil helped moisturize and protect from the sun. Some Romans even added perfumes to their oils, so not only were they clean, they smelled like a walking garden. And if you were wondering, yes, people sometimes shared strigils. Not the most hygienic by modern standards, but back then, it was totally normal. You can almost hear a Roman saying, "Bro, can I borrow your scraper?" Here's where it gets interesting. Bathing wasn't just about hygiene or fun. It was part of what it meant to be Roman. Cleanliness was tied to ideas of order, discipline, and civilization. Romans looked at other cultures and thought, they don't bathe like us, so they must be barbarians. To be clean was to be civilized, and the baths became symbols of Roman pride. Even emperors used baths as political tools. Building a massive bath complex was like saying, "Look how powerful and generous I am. I give the people water, leisure, and comfort." Baths were propaganda in marble and steam, and the culture stuck. Kids grew up knowing that bathing was a daily habit. Soldiers expected proper bathing facilities even when stationed far away. To skip the bath was like skipping your morning coffee today. People would notice, and it wouldn't look good. The baths also showed how Romans blended health with community. Doctors at the time believed bathing balanced the body's humors, basically their version of chemistry. Athletes used baths for recovery. Philosophers used them for quiet thinking. And everyday Romans used them to feel human in a crowded, noisy city. In short, cleanliness wasn't just about avoiding disease. It was about showing respect for yourself, your neighbors, and Rome itself. It was identity wrapped in steam. So, let's walk through it like you're there. You hand over a coin at the entrance and step into the tepidarium. Warm air greets you. Already you're relaxing. Next, you move into the caldarium. The heat is intense. Your skin glistens as you sweat. Around you, men are debating politics, merchants are whispering about grain prices, and someone's bragging about his new sandals. A slave rubs you with oil, then scrapes it off with a strigil. Kind of gross, but you feel fresh afterward. Finally, you plunge into the frigidarium. It's icy, shocking, but exhilarating. You come up gasping, fully awake. Afterward, you might grab a snack, read in the attached library, or just sit in the gardens and people watch. That's not just a bath. That's an experience. So, when we talk about Roman baths, we're not talking about simple hygiene. We're talking about culture. The thermae were gyms, spas, political arenas, and social networks all rolled into one. They gave Romans a sense of identity and belonging. The hot-cold routines improved health. Strigils and oils kept them clean and moisturized. And the whole practice reinforced the Roman belief that they were organized, disciplined, and superior to the unclean outsiders. In other words, the baths were Rome's secret weapon. Not because they fought wars with water, but because they built a society where being clean was part of being Roman. That's pretty powerful for something as simple as a daily soak. So far, Rome looks like the shining star of sanitation history. Aqueducts delivering endless water, baths buzzing with life, the Cloaca Maxima carrying waste out of the city. Sounds like they cracked the code, right? 1 million people living together, staying squeaky clean. But here's the twist. Did all that sanitation actually keep them healthy? That's the million denarius question. At first glance, Rome seems way ahead of its time. Running water, underground drains, public toilets. What more could you ask for? But just because something looks advanced doesn't mean it worked the way we imagine. For one, Romans didn't know about germs. They believed in miasma theory, basically the idea that bad smells caused illness. So the sewers, baths, and fountains weren't designed with bacteria in mind. They were built to keep the city looking clean and smelling fresh. Now, that did help. Clean streets and running water probably reduced some problems. But the real question is, did it stop disease in a city packed with people, animals, and waste? Spoiler, not really. Archaeologists have a weird but important job, digging through ancient toilets. It might sound gross, but old latrines are like time capsules for public health. And what did they find in Roman ones? Parasites? Lots of them. Whipworm, roundworm, tapeworm, the works. Even fancy bath-loving Romans were walking around with uninvited gut guests. And that tells us something big. Their sanitation didn't fully break the cycle of infection. Well, for starters, much of Rome's waste ended up in the Tiber River, which was also a water source for some people. Imagine dumping sewage into the same river you drink from. Not ideal. Add in chamber pots emptied out windows, overflowing cesspits, and occasional sewer blockages, and you've got a recipe for contamination. And then there were the plagues. Rome suffered through several, including the Antonine Plague in the 2nd century CE and the Plague of Cyprian in the 3rd. These weren't small outbreaks. They killed thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. Advanced infrastructure didn't protect them from waves of disease sweeping through the empire. Here's where the debate kicks in. A lot of historians argue that Roman sewers weren't even mainly designed for human waste. Instead, they were built for stormwater drainage. Think about it. Rome was a hilly city with heavy seasonal rains. Without proper drainage, streets would have turned into rivers. The Cloaca Maxima's original job was to drain marshy land and control flooding. Human waste just sort of piggybacked on the system later. And honestly, that makes sense. Public latrines did connect to sewers, but not everyone had access to them. Many households still relied on cesspits or tossed waste out. So while the sewer system was impressive, it wasn't a fully integrated citywide, flush-and-forget setup like we imagine today. It was more like a hybrid, storm drains that doubled as waste channels. Effective at moving water, but not so great at protecting people from contamination. Here's the irony. Rome built some of the most advanced infrastructure of the ancient world, but their actual public health outcomes were mixed at best. On the one hand, aqueducts brought clean water into the city. Baths gave people places to wash. Sewers kept the streets from being buried in filth. Without these, Rome probably couldn't have supported 1 million people. On the other hand, the same systems sometimes recycled problems instead of solving them. Waste went into rivers that people still used. Bath water wasn't chlorinated, obviously, so parasites could spread in pools. Even fancy scraping with oils and strigils didn't protect against microscopic invaders. In modern terms, it's like having the sleekest smartphone but no Wi-Fi. The hardware was amazing, but the science wasn't there yet. So what do we take from all this? Rome teaches us a key lesson. Infrastructure alone isn't enough. You need science too. The Romans mastered stone, arches, and hydraulics, but without germ theory, they couldn't fully understand what made people sick. Their sewers were brilliant at moving water and waste, but not at protecting health. Their baths created a culture of cleanliness, but also spread parasites. Their aqueducts delivered life-giving water, but also fed into contaminated systems. And yet, here's the flip side. Even if Rome didn't stop every disease, their infrastructure still mattered. It allowed urban life to exist on a massive scale. Without it, Rome wouldn't have been Rome. The city might have collapsed under its own waste. So yes, Romans still got sick. But without aqueducts, baths, and sewers, they might not have lasted long enough to build an empire in the first place. Rome's sanitation story is a mix of triumph and tragedy. They built the Cloaca Maxima, one of the greatest sewers in history. They turned bath time into social life. They carried water across mountains with aqueducts. And yet, they still battled worms, plagues, and contamination every day. It's a reminder that progress isn't always neat. You can have the flashiest infrastructure and still miss the hidden problems. For the Romans, cleanliness was a point of pride, but it wasn't the same as health. Okay, so by now we've seen some ancient people pull off wild sanitation tricks, sewers in the Indus Valley, Roman aqueducts, fancy bathhouses. But let's move to a very different place, the jungles of Central America, where the Maya built huge cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque. And spoiler alert, they weren't just jungle hippies painting pyramids. These folks had to wrestle with a tough enemy, water. Not too much water, not too little water, but the chaos of both. Dense rainforest, yes, but also crazy seasonal droughts. Imagine trying to live in New York if sometimes it rained like monsoon Mumbai and sometimes it felt like the Sahara. That's what the Maya were dealing with. If they wanted to run big cities and keep thousands of people alive, they had to crack the water problem. And, of course, water management means you also gotta figure out what to do with waste. So, welcome to the Maya sanitation story. Less about marble fountains, more about mud, rocks, and surprisingly smart hacks. Here's the setup. The Maya lived in what we'd call a tropical paradise, thick forests, rivers here and there, and a climate that loved to mess with them. For part of the year, it rained so much you'd think Noah needed to start building another ark. Streets would flood, rivers would burst, and life was soggy chaos. Then, boom, drought season. The ground cracked, rivers shrank, and people looked at the sky like, yo, where's my water? This flip-flop climate meant they couldn't just rely on natural rivers and ponds. If they wanted their massive cities to thrive, they had to engineer water systems. Think of it as ancient plumbing meets survival mode. So what did they do? They built reservoirs, basically giant storage tanks carved into the earth, lined with clay so the water wouldn't leak out. Cities like Tikal had multiple reservoirs, some the size of football fields. They weren't just holes in the ground either. The Maya engineered them with dams, channels, and even filtration systems. Yes, filtration. These folks weren't sipping muddy rainwater like camping amateurs. Archaeologists found that they used sand and zeolite, a volcanic mineral that acts like a natural filter. Zeolite actually removes harmful stuff like bacteria and toxins. That means 2,000 years ago, the Maya were already practicing a form of water purification that feels kinda modern. They also had canals to guide rainwater into reservoirs. Some were simple ditches, others more complex. When the rains came, these canals channeled the downpour straight into storage, ready for dry season survival. It's almost like the whole city was designed around catching and saving every drop. And here's the genius. These reservoirs weren't just for drinking water. They doubled as community hubs, almost like Roman fountains. People fetched water, washed stuff, maybe even gossiped while waiting in line. Water wasn't just survival, it was a social glue. Alright, but what about the dirty side? What goes in must come out, right? Nobody likes to think about thousands of Maya eating corn tortillas, beans, squash, and chili, and then the aftermath. But trust me, their sanitation choices mattered. There's evidence that the Maya had latrines, basic toilets near water sources or houses. Archaeologists digging in Tikal found pits that looked suspiciously like ancient porta potties. Waste was sometimes dumped into soak pits, sometimes buried, and in certain places it probably flowed into drainage channels. Were they as advanced as Roman sewers? Nah, not really. But they weren't clueless either. Waste disposal was at least partly managed, which kept the cities from turning into giant stink bombs. And let's give them credit. Building toilets in a rainforest where the ground is wet and roots are everywhere? That's no easy job. Now here's the fun and gross part: coprolites. That's the fancy word for fossilized poop. Archaeologists love this stuff because it's like a time capsule of someone's diet and health. In Maya regions, coprolites have been studied to figure out what people ate and what diseases they carried. From these ancient droppings, scientists found evidence of corn, beans, chili peppers, squash, cacao, chocolate, and even parasites. Worms, bacteria, and other nasty things lived right alongside them. So, while their water filters were impressive, the Maya still had some public health struggles. One study even suggested that during droughts, when water became scarce, diseases spread faster. People were forced to use the same small reservoirs for drinking, washing, and waste dumping. Imagine the line at the only working water tank in town, with everyone trying to juggle laundry, drinking water, and bathroom trips. What's most striking is how organized all this was. The Maya didn't just randomly dig holes and hope for rain. Their whole urban layout, streets, plazas, pyramids, was tied to water management. Reservoirs were placed carefully, canals were planned, and maintenance must have been a shared job. This shows a society that understood something very modern. Survival depends on collective responsibility. If one person decided to dump waste into the wrong canal, the whole city could get sick. So sanitation wasn't just about hygiene, it was about community survival. And you know what? This kind of civic cooperation probably helped their cities thrive for centuries. Tikal at its peak had maybe 60,000 to 100,000 people. Without water systems and some form of waste management, that many people in a rainforest would have been chaos. The Maya may not have had marble fountains or giant stone sewers, but their approach to water and waste was just as clever in its own way. They turned muddy rain into clean drinking water. They managed waste well enough to run huge cities in the middle of a rainforest. And they left us a reminder: sanitation isn't just about toilets and drains, it's about how people work together to keep their world livable. So far, we've been talking about sanitation like it's all about survival, water storage, waste disposal, not dying from bad drinking water. And sure, that's important. But the Maya weren't just practical engineers. They were also deeply spiritual people. For them, water wasn't only about quenching thirst or washing dishes, it was literally divine. It connected humans to gods, the earth, and even the cosmic order of things. Basically, where we see plumbing, they saw power. First, let's meet Chak, the Maya rain god. Think of him as the guy in charge of the cosmic sprinkler system. Without him, no rain. Without rain, no corn. Without corn, well, no tortillas, tamales, or hot chocolate mornings. In other words, Chak wasn't just a weather forecast, he was life itself. The Maya believed water was sacred because it flowed from Chak's blessings. When rains came, they celebrated. When droughts hit, they prayed, danced, and even offered sacrifices to try to win Chak's favor. Clean water wasn't just nice for hygiene, it was proof that the gods were smiling at you. So every sip of water, every bath, every rainstorm, it all carried a spiritual charge. Imagine brushing your teeth and thinking, wow, thanks, Chak. That's how deep the connection ran. Now let's talk about cenotes. If you've ever seen photos of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, you know these things are jaw-dropping, natural sinkholes filled with clear blue water. For the Maya, they were way more than just pretty swimming spots. Cenotes were water sources, yes, but also sacred portals. The Maya believed cenotes were entrances to the underworld, Xibalba, and places where humans could directly communicate with the gods. That meant drawing water from a cenote wasn't just about filling a jug, it was about touching the divine. Archaeologists have found offerings at the bottoms of cenotes, jade beads, pottery, even human sacrifices. Sounds dark, but for the Maya, giving something precious to the water spirits was a way to keep balance in the world. If you wanted Chak's rain and the earth's fertility, you gave back through ritual. So, picture this. You walk to the local cenote bucket in hand. You scoop water for drinking, but you also pause, drop in a little offering, maybe whisper a prayer. It's everyday life mixed with cosmic duty. Hygiene and holiness blended into one. Now let's shift from open water to indoor steam. The Maya used temazcals, sweat baths made from stone or adobe. Imagine a small dome-shaped hut, kind of like a sauna, heated with hot stones and steam. People went inside, poured water on the rocks, and sweated it out. But here's the twist. Temazcals weren't just about sweating off last night's chilly heavy feast. They were spiritual cleansing stations. People believed that by sweating, they weren't only removing dirt from the skin, but also purging sickness, bad energy, even sin. Birth rituals sometimes involved temazcals, with mothers recovering inside. Warriors before or after battle could purify themselves there. Priests might use them before ceremonies. In other words, cleanliness wasn't just about smelling nice, it was about being spiritually fit for life's big moments. So the next time you're in a modern spa sauna, sweating in silence, just remember, you're basically borrowing an idea the Maya were rocking centuries ago, only for them it came with prayers to the gods and a cosmic reset button. Here's the big takeaway. For the Maya, sanitation wasn't only about keeping the city tidy. It was about keeping the universe itself in order. Think of it this way, dirty water, waste piled up, pollution. Those weren't just health risks. They were signs of imbalance, disorder, even disrespect toward the gods. On the flip side, clean water, orderly streets, and ritual bathing showed harmony between humans and the divine. In Maya thought, the world had layers: sky above, earth in the middle, underworld below. Water flowed through all of them, linking the realms. Keeping water pure and using it respectfully meant keeping the whole cosmos balanced. It's like sanitation was both city planning and spiritual insurance. Take care of your drains and reservoirs, yes, but also honor check, respect cenotes, and sweat it out in the temazcal. Do all that, and you weren't just managing waste, you were holding the universe together. Now, don't think all this made the Maya stiff or humorless about cleanliness. Imagine a group of friends in a sweat bath, joking while steam poured down, or neighbors gossiping while fetching water at a cenote. Even in sacred settings, humans are humans. Someone probably complained, "It's too hot in here," or "Chak better bring rain after I just gave him my favorite jade bead." That mix of everyday chatter and spiritual respect is what makes Maya sanitation culture fascinating. It wasn't all solemn chants and sacrifices. It was life, messy, sweaty, funny, and holy, all wrapped together. When we think of sanitation today, we mostly picture pipes, sewers, and treatment plants. The Maya remind us there's another layer, one that connects cleanliness to meaning, to community, to the sacred. For them, keeping water pure and practicing rituals wasn't just survival, it was cosmic responsibility. So now we've walked through three big players in ancient sanitation: the Indus Valley, Rome, and the Maya. Each one had its own vibe, its own style, its own version of what clean and organized meant. But how do they stack up when we put them side by side? It's like comparing three contestants in an ancient sanitation idol competition. Let's break it down. First up, the Indus Valley. These folks were the quiet overachievers. They didn't build flashy temples or shout about their greatness with giant monuments. Instead, they showed off by building cities that were shockingly well-planned. Straight streets, grids, drains running under houses, even bathrooms inside people's homes. That's right, for 1,000 years ago, someone in Mohenjo-Daro was chilling in their private bathroom while the rest of the world was still figuring out where to dump garbage. Their approach was all about centralized planning. The whole city looked like it had been designed by one really picky architect who hated chaos. Now swing over to Rome. The Romans were not shy. If the Indus Valley was the neat freak who quietly aced the exam, Rome was the kid who built a giant science project that lit up the whole classroom. Aqueducts marching across valleys, public baths the size of stadiums, the Cloaca Maxima moving rivers of water and waste out of the city. It was all about scale. They loved megaprojects. Bigger is better, might as well have been carved into their aqueduct arches. Their idea of sanitation was tied directly to urban expansion. Rome kept growing, and so they kept building More water, more fountains, more sewers. And sure, sometimes they overpromised. The baths and sewers didn't always protect people from disease, but they sure looked impressive. And then we've got the Maya. Different story altogether. While the Indus were drawing blueprints and the Romans were pouring concrete, the Maya were asking deeper questions. What does water mean? How does it connect us to the gods? They lived in a landscape where water was tricky, rainforests but also droughts, rivers that disappeared underground, cenotes that looked like portals to another world. So instead of just building drains and pipes, they built rituals around water. Cenotes weren't just wells, they were sacred. Sweat baths weren't just for cleaning up, they were spiritual resets. For the Maya, sanitation wasn't only physical, it was cosmic. Their system leaned heavily on communal rituals. Everyone took part in keeping water and cleanliness tied to order in the universe. Now here's the fun part. Let's contrast the drivers behind these three systems. The Indus Valley was driven by engineering innovation, but in a super practical, civic way. Their focus was, how do we make this city livable for thousands of people without drowning in our own waste? No big religious monuments have been found to explain it, which makes it even cooler. It looks like they just cared about people living comfortably together. Rome, on the other hand, was driven by urban expansion and showmanship. They wanted to prove they were the masters of the known world, and nothing says, we're in charge, like water flowing uphill into 100 fountains. Their sanitation doubled as propaganda. When you walked into Rome and saw water pouring from marble lion heads into massive basins, you didn't just see plumbing. You saw empire. The Maya's driver was spiritual purity. Their approach asked, how do we stay in balance with the rain god Chak, with the underworld in the cenotes, with the order of the cosmos? They built clever systems like reservoirs and filtration, but it was always wrapped in ritual meaning. A reservoir wasn't just storage, it was a sacred gift from the gods that needed respect. So, what did they get right? Let's give credit where it's due. The Indus nailed the idea of household-level sanitation. Bathrooms in homes, covered drains, soak pits, stuff that wouldn't become common again until much later. They showed that sanitation can be decentralized but still perfectly coordinated. The Romans got right the scale of infrastructure. Without aqueducts and sewers, Rome never could have supported 1 million people. They proved that when you combine ambition with engineering, you can make a city thrive far beyond normal limits. The Maya got right the idea that cleanliness is more than physical. By tying sanitation to ritual, they gave it meaning that kept people engaged. It wasn't just wash your hands because it's healthy, it was wash your hands because the gods are watching. That's a pretty strong motivator. And where did they struggle? Well, the Indus Valley eventually collapsed, and one theory is that changes in rivers or climate wrecked their drainage system. Advanced as they were, nature had the last word. Rome's problem was that all their flash didn't equal full health. They still had parasites, plagues, and sewage leaking into the Tiber. For all their genius, they didn't have germ theory, so a lot of people still got sick. The Maya struggled with geography and drought. Even with reservoirs and cenotes, water shortages were constant threats. And sometimes the heavy ritual layer meant sacrifices and offerings that, from a modern lens, seem brutal. When you step back, it's kind of beautiful to see how each civilization's sanitation system reflected its personality. The Indus Valley, organized, civic-minded, almost democratic in how everyone got a bathroom. Rome, ambitious, dramatic, showing off through aqueducts and sewers that were as much symbols as they were utilities. The Maya, deeply spiritual, weaving water and waste into their understanding of the universe. It makes you realize that sanitation isn't just about drains and pipes. It's about culture, values, priorities. Some societies wanted order, some wanted glory, some wanted cosmic harmony. And in the end, all three remind us that keeping cities clean has never been just a technical problem. It's always been about who we are and what we believe. When we talk about sanitation, it's easy to get lost in the pipes, drains, aqueducts, and fancy engineering. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just stone and water. It was people. Real people sitting on latrines, sweating it out in steam baths, hauling buckets of waste, or whispering prayers at a sacred pool. To really understand ancient sanitation, you've got to picture the human side. What did it actually feel like to live with these systems? How did people behave, who had access, and who did the dirty jobs nobody else wanted? Let's step into the daily lives of folks from the Indus Valley, Rome, and the Maya, and see what sanitation looked like up close. First, let's talk about using the systems themselves. Imagine walking into a Roman public latrine. It wasn't some private, quiet stall like today. No, this was a long stone bench with holes, side by side, no dividers. You and your neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, chatting while doing your business. Romans thought of latrines as social spaces, not awkward places where you avoided eye contact. If you needed to wipe, you didn't get toilet paper. Instead, you dipped a sponge on a stick into water, used it, and passed it along. Not exactly a personal item, but hey, it was normal for them. Public etiquette meant you just accepted it. Over in the Indus Valley, the vibe was different. People actually had private bathrooms inside their homes. Imagine that luxury thousands of years ago. A small room with a brick platform where water could wash waste into a covered drain. No need to make small talk with your neighbor while squatting. Using the bathroom there probably felt quiet and practical. It shows how much the culture valued order and private cleanliness. No sponges on sticks here, just simple design that worked. The Maya brought a spiritual twist. Using a sweat bath, or temazcal, wasn't only about cleaning your body. It was about cleansing your soul. Picture stepping inside a little dome hut, steam swirling around you as water hits hot rocks. You sweat, you pray, you maybe chant. You come out feeling lighter, not just cleaner. For bathing at cenotes, people probably mixed daily chores with ritual acts, fetching water while also leaving offerings. Hygiene was never just hygiene, it was sacred duty. Now, behind all these systems were the workers who kept them running. In Rome, someone had to clean out those sewers. The Cloaca Maxima didn't stay clear on its own. Sewer cleaners crawled into the dark, smelly tunnels, clearing blockages, scooping muck, risking their health. Street sweepers collected waste tossed from windows or dumped from chamber pots. These workers weren't celebrated in marble statues, but without them the city would have drowned in filth. They were the invisible backbone of sanitation. The Indus Valley probably had a similar class of laborers, though we don't know their names. Archaeologists found soak pits and manholes built into the drains, clear signs that someone was expected to climb in and clear the sludge. It takes planning to build a manhole, and that means you've thought about the workers. Whoever did those jobs, they were part of what kept Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro livable. The Maya too had their sanitation workforce. Maintaining reservoirs, canals, and filtration systems in a rainforest climate wasn't easy. Clearing silt, repairing walls, even collecting waste for disposal, all of that took labor. And while rituals were important, someone had to handle the practical side, like making sure the reservoir didn't clog up with debris. Every civilization had its hidden sanitation heroes, usually low-status folks whose hard work made everyone else's life smoother. Of course, access to sanitation wasn't the same for everyone. Gender made a difference. In Rome, men and women could both visit baths, but usually at different times or in separate sections. Public baths were massive hubs, but women's access could be more limited, especially depending on social class. Wealthy women might have private baths at home, while poorer ones had to wait for their allotted times in the public ones. In public latrines, it's not totally clear if men and women shared, but most evidence suggests they were mainly male spaces. In the Indus Valley, the picture looks more equal. With private bathrooms built into homes, sanitation wasn't about public spaces but about daily family life. That meant both men and women had access, at least in households wealthy enough to have them. Since the design was built into the city grid, it suggests sanitation was a standard feature, not a luxury reserved for the elite. That makes the Indus feel almost modern in their approach. For the Maya, gender differences showed up in rituals. Sweat baths were used by both men and women, but in different contexts. Women used temazcals after childbirth or as part of family healing rituals, while men used them before battles or ceremonies. Cenotes were communal spaces, but rituals there could be led by male priests, with women participating in offerings. So while sanitation was sacred for all, the roles were split. Who led the ritual and who fetched the water often came down to gender. And then there's the everyday culture around these spaces. Roman baths weren't just about washing. They were about hanging out, doing business, flirting, hearing gossip. Imagine walking into a steaming hall full of people debating politics while soaking in hot water. It was basically part health spa, part social club, part marketplace of ideas. In the Indus Valley, the culture was quieter but no less telling. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro suggests bathing was public but also ceremonial. Maybe it wasn't as chatty as a Roman bathhouse, but it carried weight in community life. For the Maya, sweat baths and cenote rituals created a shared experience that tied people together spiritually as well as socially. So what did it actually feel like? For a Roman, using sanitation was public, noisy, and shared. You weren't alone, you were part of a crowd, whether in a bath or latrine. For someone in the Indus Valley, it was orderly and private, more about quiet cleanliness than public display. For the Maya, it was cosmic. Every drop of water, every bath, every offering connected you to gods and ancestors. Cleanliness was never just about the body, it was about the soul. And then, of course, there were the people doing the jobs nobody wanted. The cleaners, the waste collectors, the diggers. Without them, no system worked. They lived in the shadows of society but carried the real weight of sanitation. The glamorous baths and sacred cenotes only looked good because someone else did the dirty work. That's the human side of sanitation. It wasn't just drains and aqueducts. It was people sitting, sweating, scrubbing, hauling, gossiping, praying, and surviving. And even though the technology was different, the experience feels strangely familiar. Because in the end, sanitation isn't just about water and waste. It's about us. Sanitation might sound like just pipes and drains, but in the ancient world, it was also about power. Whoever controlled the water, controlled the people. Take Rome, for example. Their aqueducts weren't just big stone water slides. They were symbols of political clout. A senator could win hearts if he brought water to a thirsty part of town. Imagine a politician today showing up with free Wi-Fi towers. That's how aqueducts worked. A steady gush of clean water meant loyalty. You'd remember who made your bath possible. But aqueducts were expensive, and only the elite could really decide where they were built. That meant water wasn't just about thirst or hygiene. It was about influence. When a new aqueduct was announced, people didn't just think, cool, fresh water. They thought, the emperor is flexing. Water became a way to keep the empire glued together. Citizens might argue about taxes or laws, but if they were getting baths, fountains, and flowing taps, well, life felt civilized. It's hard to rebel when you're freshly scrubbed and your laundry is clean. Of course, not everyone had equal access. The rich got private pipes straight to their villas. The poor lined up at public fountains, buckets in hand, and hoped the supply didn't run dry. That inequality wasn't an accident. It was design. Leaders could turn the taps up or down depending on who they wanted to favor. Aqueducts weren't just plumbing, they were politics. If you controlled water, you could tilt the city in your favor. Meanwhile, over in the Indus Valley, things played out differently. They didn't have emperors showing off with mega projects. Their power was more subtle. Their cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, were planned like grid paper. Straight streets, neat drains, house-to-house water setups. It wasn't about one king saying, "Look at my giant aqueduct." It was more about everyone buying into a shared idea. Cleanliness equals order. Think about it. Every house had some kind of bathroom. The drains lined up neatly. Soak pits dotted the streets for easy cleaning. That didn't happen because one person dictated it. It suggests a whole society that valued hygiene as part of its identity. Maybe the leaders there didn't need to shout about power. The very organization of the city did the talking. Look, we're tidy, we're clean, we're advanced. In a way, sanitation became proof of governance. If your drains clogged or your streets stank, people would know you weren't managing things right. Religion likely played a role too. In Indus culture, water seemed tied to ritual purity. Bathing platforms and carefully arranged drains hint at more than just staying mud-free. Maybe washing was spiritual as much as practical. If leaders promoted cleanliness, they weren't just keeping disease at bay, they were showing alignment with the sacred. A clean city wasn't just efficient. It was holy. That gave rulers moral authority. Jump over to the Maya world and the picture shifts again. The Maya lived in rainforests with rivers that vanished in dry seasons. Controlling water meant survival, plain and simple. Cities like Tikal and Palenque built reservoirs, canals, and even filtration systems with volcanic rock. If you were a leader, being the guy who could guarantee fresh water in a drought meant serious prestige. Forget delivering speeches. Deliver a drink and you've got loyalty. But it wasn't just about utility. Water was sacred to them. Chak, the rain god, wasn't just prayed to, he was feared. Cenotes, those natural wells, weren't just sources of hydration but also ritual sites. Leaders had to manage not just the flow of water, but the rituals that kept the gods happy. Sanitation and religion blurred into one. Keeping the reservoirs clean or organizing a ritual offering in a cenote wasn't just practical governance. It was cosmic responsibility. Leaders were seen as bridges between the people and divine water power. And then there were sweat baths or temazcals. These weren't just spas. They were sacred spaces where hygiene, health, and ritual all mingled. Imagine a mayor today running a sauna as a spiritual duty. For the Maya, leaders didn't just govern, they purified. Sanitation wasn't a side issue. It was woven into their idea of cosmic balance. If things got dirty, the world itself could tip into chaos. So if we step back, you see three very different flavors of sanitation politics. Rome went big on engineering projects, flexing with aqueducts, sewers, and fountains. Indus went the civic order route, showing power through careful, quiet planning of everyday cleanliness. And the Maya mixed it with religion, where keeping water flowing wasn't just survival, it was pleasing the gods and keeping the universe steady. But all three reveal a common thread: sanitation wasn't neutral. It wasn't just, let's build drains because it smells. It was part of how societies organized themselves, showed off their power, and kept people in line. Leaders used it as proof of competence, as a way to win favor, and as a link between the human and the divine. It's also funny to think about how something so basic, like a toilet or a drain, became political currency. Imagine being in Rome and hearing an announcement, "Good news! The emperor has funded a new aqueduct." The crowd cheers not just because water is nice, but because it feels like the empire is solid. Or imagine in the Indus Valley, where the local leader didn't need to stand on a platform shouting promises. The neat drains running under your feet already whispered, "We've got this." Of course, there were limits. If rivers shifted or rains failed, even the best systems could collapse. All the politics in the world couldn't stop climate change or floods. But until disaster struck, sanitation was one of the strongest tools of authority. People could live with taxes, wars, or rules they didn't love. But deny them clean water? Forget it. That's how fast loyalty evaporates. If there's one thing history loves to remind us, it's that toilets, drains, and clean water aren't boring side details. They're the stuff that can make or break a civilization. We look back at Rome, Indus Valley, the Maya, and see that every time, sanitation was tied to survival, power, even identity. And here we are today, still wrestling with a lot of the same issues, just with shinier pipes and more complicated politics. Let's start with the obvious. Ancient people had to figure out how to move water in, keep waste out, and keep disease at bay. We're not that different. Cities today, New York, Mumbai, Lagos, still depend on systems that are basically big cousins of Roman aqueducts or Indus drains. We turn a tap and clean water pours out. We flush a toilet and trust the waste vanishes. But behind the scenes, it's a constant balancing act. Just like in ancient times, these systems need money, maintenance, and planning. And when they fail, chaos is never far behind. Take climate change. This is where the past starts echoing in a spooky way. Remember how the Indus Valley may have collapsed because rivers shifted or droughts hit. Their neat drains and soak pits couldn't do much once the water supply itself dried up. Well, today we're staring at the same problem, but on a global scale. Melting glaciers threaten water supplies. Rising seas put coastal sewage systems at risk. Droughts turn reservoirs into cracked bowls of dust. If the Indus had a plumbing apocalypse, we might be heading for one too, just with more people and higher stakes. Think about cities like Cape Town a few years ago, counting down to day zero, when taps would literally run dry. That's not just an inconvenience. That's civilization-level stress. Imagine millions of people with no water to drink, cook, or bathe. Suddenly, all the technology and politics in the world feels flimsy. It's the same lesson the Indus faced. No matter how good your drains are, if nature pulls the rug, the whole system wobbles. But it's not only about too little water. Sometimes it's about too much. Flooding in cities overwhelms drains, pushes sewage back into streets, and spreads disease. Sound familiar? Rome's Cloaca Maxima was built to drain stormwater, not just waste, because they too dealt with flooding rivers. Today, hurricanes and rising seas are testing our systems in the same way. New Orleans during Katrina, or Mumbai during monsoons, suddenly modern cities don't feel much sturdier than ancient ones. Here's the kicker: even with all our tech, we still struggle with fairness in access. Ancient Rome had public fountains for the poor and private pipes for the rich. Fast forward 2,000 years and guess what? It's not so different. In many parts of the world, the wealthy enjoy clean, steady water from taps, while poorer neighborhoods line up for tankers or carry buckets. Access to sanitation still mirrors access to power. The lesson is clear: sanitation isn't just engineering, it's justice. And it goes beyond comfort. Without safe water, societies crumble. Disease spreads fast when sewage mixes with drinking water. We've seen it with cholera outbreaks in refugee camps, with contaminated pipes in cities, even with lead in Flint, Michigan. History tells us again and again that sanitation is survival. The Romans knew it when they poured resources into aqueducts. The Maya knew it when they filtered water through volcanic rock. The Indus knew it when they aligned every brick drain neatly. And we should know it too, but sometimes we act like flushing toilets are optional luxuries instead of lifelines. Now, here's where the humor sneaks in. Ancient people probably didn't sit around saying, "We need resilient climate-ready infrastructure." They just wanted their streets to not smell like a cesspit. But in chasing that basic comfort, they built systems that kept their cities thriving. Today we dress it up in fancy language: sustainable development goals, urban resilience plans, but at the end of the day, it's the same human need. Clean water in, dirty water out, or everything falls apart. The scary part is how fragile it all is. One drought, one flood, one shift in the river, and the Indus cities faded. One parasite, one plague, and Rome's bath culture suddenly looked less glamorous. The Maya built incredible reservoirs, but once climate stress stacked up, even their systems faltered. It shows us that no matter how advanced we think we are, nature still calls the shots. Climate change is basically nature reminding us who's boss, and our shiny treatment plants might not be as invincible as we like to think. So what can we take from all this? First, never underestimate the power of sanitation. It's not background stuff, it's the backbone of civilization. You can have art, trade, and politics, but without drains and clean water, it all collapses into disease and disorder. Second, remember that fairness matters. When sanitation only serves the privileged, society fractures. History shows us that the best systems were the ones that served everyone, not just the elites. And third, don't ignore the environment. You can't out-engineer climate forever. If rivers dry up or seas rise, you need flexibility, not just big pipes. Maybe the most striking lesson is how sanitation shapes identity. Rome took pride in its aqueducts and baths. The Indus showcased civic order with tidy drains. The Maya tied water to the gods. Today, maybe our identity could be tied to sustainability. Imagine a world where cities brag not just about skyscrapers but about zero-waste water recycling. Where clean water access is celebrated like a sports victory. Where drains are cool again. Okay, maybe that's pushing it, but you get the idea. In the end, the parallels are too close to ignore. Ancient people weren't clueless. They were fighting the same battles we are. Too much water, too little water, keeping cities healthy, keeping power fair. Their successes gave us models to admire. Their failures give us warnings we'd be foolish to forget. We like to think of ourselves as way ahead of them, but if climate change keeps pushing, we might find ourselves relearning the same hard lessons, bucket in hand. So yeah, sanitation isn't glamorous, but it's the thing that keeps civilization standing tall. Without it, even the mightiest city can end up like the Indus Valley, dust and broken drains. With it, we can survive, grow, and maybe even thrive. The taps we turn so casually today are part of a story thousands of years long, and that story still has the same moral. No water, no civilization. Sanitation has been hiding in plain sight all along, playing the role of history's quiet sidekick. You know how in superhero movies there's always that one character who doesn't get the spotlight but actually keeps everything together? That's sanitation. No capes, no flashy powers, but without it, civilizations would have been knee-deep in their own mess, literally. We've walked through a whole timeline of cities and cultures. From the tidy grids of the Indus Valley, to Rome flexing with aqueducts, to the Maya finding ways to turn jungle rain into life support. Every time, sanitation wasn't just about being clean. It was about control, identity, survival. It was the invisible scaffolding propping up everything else. Trade, politics, religion, even leisure. Because what good is debating philosophy in a Roman forum if the streets outside smell like a garbage pit? The recap is simple. Sanitation shaped destiny. The Indus showed us how civic order and fairness could literally be built into brick-lined drains. Rome showed us how water could be political power. Flowing aqueducts meant flowing influence. The Maya reminded us that cleanliness could be spiritual, tied to gods, rituals, and cosmic order. And the lesson woven through all three? You can't separate infrastructure from culture. Drains weren't just drains, they were symbols of who people were and how they wanted their world to run. And it wasn't only about the big stuff. Imagine the human side of it. Ordinary folks living thousands of years ago felt the same relief we do when they rinsed off dirt after a long day, or when waste got carried away instead of sitting around. They may not have had shower gels with ocean breeze scents, but they had baths, sweat lodges, communal fountains. These things shaped daily rhythms, relationships, even health. The miracle is that such unglamorous routines turned out to be the secret ingredient for civilizations that lasted centuries. But here's the twist. Sanitation didn't always save the day. Even the best systems couldn't hold back disease, famine, or climate shifts. The Indus drains couldn't fix rivers that vanished. Rome's sewers didn't stop plagues. The Maya's reservoirs couldn't change the rain. And that's the humbling part. Sanitation gave civilizations a fighting chance, but nature always had the final vote. Maybe that's why these ancient stories feel so relevant now. We've got more tech, but we're still playing the same game. Think about it. Every time you turn on a tap, you're standing on 5,000 years of trial and error. That smooth stream of water is a direct descendant of aqueduct arches, of brick drains in Mohenjo-Daro, of Maya reservoirs carved from limestone. Every flush you barely think about is a ritual older than kings and empires. It's not just plumbing. It's a thread connecting us back to ancestors who figured out that survival meant managing what came in and what went out. There's something kind of poetic in that. We don't think of taps or toilets as historical artifacts, but they are. They're proof that we belong to a long chain of problem solvers who refuse to live knee-deep in waste. They're symbols of both genius and fragility. They remind us that civilization isn't only built on wars won or monuments raised, it's also built on drains that didn't clog and baths that kept people healthy enough to dream bigger. And maybe that's the perspective shift worth holding on to. When we talk about the glory of Rome, the mystery of the Indus, or the brilliance of the Maya, we should also talk about the pipes, pits, and baths. They were the hidden lifelines. They kept people alive long enough to write poetry, build temples, and carve stories into stone. Without sanitation, none of the cultural glitter would have had a chance to shine. So next time you casually turn on a tap or flush away yesterday's dinner, pause for a second. You're participating in a story that stretches back 5 millennia. A story where humans again and again looked at dirty water or foul streets and said, "Nope, we can do better." And they did. And because they did, we're here. That tiny, everyday action of rinsing your hands or stepping into a shower isn't just hygiene. It's history in motion. As the credits roll on this journey, picture the invisible heroes. The anonymous drain builders of Mohenjo-Daro, hauling bricks in the sun. The Roman engineers measuring aqueduct arches with a pride that probably felt like magic. The Maya laborers stacking stones to capture rain, whispering prayers to Chak. None of them knew they were creating the backbone of civilization. They just wanted cleaner streets, safer water, healthier lives. Yet their work still ripples forward to us. And that's kind of the perfect closing note. Civilization wasn't carried forward by glory alone. It was carried forward by something humbler, quieter, often taken for granted. Sanitation, the hidden lifeline, kept the wheels turning. It's not flashy, but maybe that's the point. The best heroes often aren't. And if you want a soundtrack for this thought, picture gentle strings in the background. Something calm, steady, reflective. Not a triumphant march, but a reminder, like water flowing through pipes, that civilization's greatest victories sometimes hum along quietly in the background, keeping everything alive.